to be with you again. I hope you're having a great week. Welcome to Matthew study number 56. Today, as I have promised, we are going to move right ahead and move into the next section of Matthew chapter 4. Actually, the very end of Matthew chapter 4. Now, before we get into this passage, it's just a couple of things I want to mention. This end of chapter 4, from verse 23 through to the end of the chapter, verse 25, can be seen as a transitional piece, connecting everything that's gone before with what comes in the following, with the Sermon on the Mount. Oftentimes we look at the Bible and the subsections that are given to us. We must remember, however, that the chapters and the verses are not really in the original text, and indeed was added in the medieval times. So we shouldn't be bound by the chapters and the verses. I say that to you because while this is at the end of chapter 4, this very well could be better seen as a setup of everything that comes after it from chapter 5 through chapter 7. In other words, Matthew has given us already that Jesus is beginning his ministry. As we saw a couple of weeks ago, he did it at the right time, at the right place, with the right message. He has now begun to gather his disciples, and we see the calling of 4 disciples. So he wants some who are following him to see what's about to happen. And then we get the Sermon on the Mount that's coming after his great teaching. But Matthew wants us to see what is the pattern of what is to come. And indeed, this is a pattern really that we see throughout the rest of the Gospel of Matthew. We see it here in verse 23 through 25. So let me just read that to us to give us a sense of what we're looking at today. Again, Matthew chapter 4, verse 23. And he went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every affliction among the people. So his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought him all the sick, those afflicted with various diseases and pains, those oppressed by demons, epileptics and paralytics, and he healed them. And great crowds followed him from Galilee and the Decapolis, and from Jerusalem and all Judea, and from beyond the Jordan. Now, as we look at this on this Wednesday morning, I want to just focus, if I can, on verse 23, because I think here we get the pattern. He, Jesus, went throughout all of Galilee. Now, again, remember, if you have a concept of what Galilee is, it is this northern region. It's north of Jerusalem. It's north of the Judean area. It involves people who are primarily Jewish in terms of who we see Jesus teaching to, but we know that there is a lot of intermixture, right? As we studied it before, between Jews and Gentiles. We also know that this is an area that likes new ideas and is open to different concepts. Exactly the kind of people that Jesus would want to teach. We also know that this is a populous area, right? More than 200 different villages, according to the historian Josephus, with more than 15,000 people in it. And here, Matthew tells us that Jesus went throughout all of Galilee. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that he visited every single village, but what it does give us an idea is that Jesus traveled this Galilean area. Remember, 50, 60 miles long by 25 to 30 miles wide. So it wouldn't have been too much for him to travel around, nor would it have been too much for people to have followed him. And the pattern that we have is that he taught in the synagogues, that he proclaimed the gospel and that he healed every type of disease and every affliction. So let's break that down. First of all, he taught in the synagogues. The synagogues was something that we believe came out of the Babylonian exile hundreds of years before. Certainly still the temple in Jerusalem is the high point of Judaism. But for many Jewish people, the temple would have been perhaps as many as thousands of miles away and would have been beyond the reach of the vast majority of Jews who lived outside of Jerusalem. And so the synagogue was created. It was the center part of Jewish life. It was the center part of the social life and the religious life and the political life of most Hebrew people. And the synagogues would be in the various villages and in the various towns. So we see that Jesus' pattern was first to go to the synagogues, and we see that he was teaching, meaning that he was expounding upon the scriptures. A very central part of the Jewish worship would have been to take out the scriptures and to teach from it what it meant. Jesus then would go and proclaim or preach the gospel. As again, the word that we looked at last week, that he would herald the good news to come. Now there's a connection here between the preaching and the teaching, right? He would teach and explain the good news, and he would proclaim the good news. And you can't have one without the other. He would proclaim it throughout all of Galilee, but he would teach it and explain what was meant by it in the synagogues. And then this is followed by and interspersed with the healing of all kinds of diseases. We see this pattern of the teaching and preaching on the one hand, and the miracles of Jesus giving evidence to his authority to teach and preach on the other. So we have the miraculous healing on the one hand that affirm the teaching and the preaching, and we have the teaching and the preaching on the other that affirm the miracles. In other words, the two go hand in hand. And Matthew, throughout his gospel, gives us these sections of the discourses or the teachings of Jesus, and then it would be followed by the works of Jesus. So we have the words of Jesus, followed by the works of Jesus, followed by the words of Jesus. You see this going back and forth. And Matthew is setting up the pattern here in verse 23. He's saying this is what happened. And we see that there were great results, that there were many who came, that his fame spread throughout all of Syria. But to really expound on that, I invite you to come back and join me Thursday morning, tomorrow morning. We'll talk more about how this worked for Jesus in his early ministry. I'm glad you're here with me today, and I hope that you have a great, blessed day.